Okay, so we're recording. So my first question is, what is your view of a virus, and how have we got into this state where people are actually producing such strong symptoms right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to start where I'm going to finish, actually.
Okay.
And I'm going to start just by going back to cellular awakening. So the most important thing around the cell and its health is the cell membrane and the polarity and charge of the cell membrane, what we call the cell membrane potential. And so everything that we're focusing in terms of staying healthy, our own biome, is actually centered around that. And the nucleus should stay positive, the inner membrane negative, the outer membrane positive. And the differential between that positive and negative, you want to be extremely strong. That really is your immune response. You're living within our universe. So the positive outer charge attracts all of the negatively charged electrons. And these are donated by Mother Earth. These are our feet on the ground. This is that earth part of us. And those electrons, depending on the strength of the cell membrane potential, it can become enormous. And we have it in common with whales and dolphins. We are the 3 species on planet Earth who can produce enormous electrons if we're working correctly to evolve. Now those electrons, that electron cloud traps the photons of light. And those photons of light attract the oxygen molecules. So there we have the perfect situation. Really, the more we work at that, the healthier, the more fulfilled a person can become. Mm-hmm. And if that's in situ, what actually takes place is the thing that's never ever been talked about in nutrition, is transmutation. It's pure alchemy. Magic takes place. It shouldn't be that only children's books are full of magic. The whole way that the body works is purely alchemical through transmutation. And so what we need to look at today is that cell represented in the way I've just described is our inner universe within. But then you have the greater universe. And what we need to do is to invite in as much of the outer universe as we possibly can, so that we get an enlarged picture of what all of this is really about. Because it's kind of interesting, I think, in lockdown, they think they've diminished where people look at things, but in fact, in slowing the human down, so many people are going back to study, look, explore the amazing expansion potential of where we're at. So that is very, very critical when we start to look at viral activity or whatever. So there are 16 stages of deterioration that can take place. So
did you say 16, Barbara? 16.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Is everyone getting the sound okay? Yeah, brilliant. No one's saying not. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Could you speak up a little bit, Barbara?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Yes, so 16 stages of deterioration, let's put it like that, of change. So this perfect cell that I've just described will have the ability to attract 80% of its requirements for making ATP, the energy, from oxygen. But remember that big electron cloud trapping all the photons of light, pulling in the oxygen. So the perfect functioning of the cell is 80% oxygen, and it will only require 20% of glucose to produce the ATP. Now, there are 16 stages of how that deteriorates to go to the other extreme, where the cell membrane is so weak that there's hardly an electron cloud, so very little connection to Mother Earth. And so that small electron cloud can't trap enough photons of light. So in order to create energy, to produce the energy, the cell has to then, because only 20% is coming via oxygen, it reverts to using 80% glucose. And in so doing, it goes into what we call energy sparing. And then it becomes quite fetal-like and starts to replicate itself. So that's what happens with an almost anaerobic cell. So in order to answer to add, our discussion, Emma, when we think about viruses, bacteria, all of those things, whether they activate, because let's face it, they're all inside us all of the time and have been since, centuries and centuries.
So can I just emphasize that, Barbara? All viruses and bacteria are inside us all of the time, yeah?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
We don't need to be afraid of them.
Yes. Yeah. No, when you stop and think about it, it is so important to embrace and love the work of Antoine Béchamp.
Yeah.
Pasteur was a nightmare. If we hadn't had Pasteur being heavily funded by the French government, we wouldn't have had the pharmaceutical industry that we have today. Because when you stop and think about it, the pharmaceutical industry depends totally upon us thinking everything invades from outside. That is nonsense. Things don't invade. We invite them in. If there's a weakness, we let them in. So totally depending on these 16 stages of available oxygen and light, the photons, which are a prerequisite to the oxygen being attracted, and the transmutation, depends on the activity we allow within. So, great big electron cloud, loads of photons, which is a huge potential at the moment, which we'll talk about later, and all of that oxygen. This is what we're working towards in true nutrition. And true nutrition is all about incorporating within the human body and within all living beings and plants that upper heavenly energy and the earth energy. And it's where it meets around these cells. So, there's a lot of arguing as to, is this viral, is it whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now, where I would go now for clarification, many years ago, I came upon the work of Dr. Lawrence Broxmyer.
Yeah.
And Broxmyer. He's still working as a doctor in New York. And this was a large article about the Spanish flu pandemic. And he was saying it was TB which killed the people. What are the prerequisites for TB? Shortage of oxygen, shortage of light, and terrible nutrition.
So shortage of oxygen, shortage of light, and terrible nutrition. Wow. Yeah.
Those are the three prerequisites for illness. Ultimately, we're talking TB here, because he was saying actually TB is the thing we should be worried about. And I would say absolutely honestly to everybody today, if we are supposed to be worried about a pandemic, it's not now.
Yeah.
The thing that we should understand to prevent is a re-emergence of TB. Since 2016, the Chinese government have been completely overwhelmed and worried by the amount of TB. Here, exactly the same, particularly in London. Now, remember I mentioned light. And so this explains for you why Black ethnic people are faring so much worse than white-skinned people. They're not in their natural habitat, and therefore the darkness of the skin precludes the making of enough vitamin D3 from light. You then shove them in a high-rise flat in London, you shove them to work in intensive care, no windows, they have very little money, rubbish food. So everything in nature, everything that expresses itself is very, very logical. There are no surprises. So what is the definition of TB? The definition of TB is the inability to be able to keep calcium in the correct place. Now, let's go back to our cell membrane potential. The charge of the cell membrane potential is totally dependent upon our 4 electrolytes. So the calcium, one of those biggies. And so this is what happens in the extreme. And then, of course, you don't get the oxygenation. So to me, what we're really looking at and what we should really be working on as practitioners is to help lift people away from what, as a homeopath, I call the tubercular miasm, but as a natural nutritionist, I call the tubercular taint. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the first big disease that caused issues. And what I found very interesting, obviously, as we've all been doing, looking at all, many immunologists and environmentalists. And it was the Irish lady, Dolores Carhill, who was explaining that there are only 3 illnesses that could be passed on by the touch, which they've tried to be telling us about with COVID. And these 3 are TB, smallpox, and Ebola. And Ebola, of course, is a very, very, very rampant form of TB. I was invited to the embassy, as you know, Emma, they chose 4, I think, people running colleges and had been doing it for a long time. And it's so obvious that that was this within the person. This is what we have to get used to. It's what gets re-emerged within us. We are the totally responsible part of this story of how it manifests. So all the scaremongering and whatever, it is down to us. Let's stop saying, 5G, well, it's a hideous thing, 5G, but it's blaming somebody else, the outside. Oh, look what they're doing. No, we are responsible for our inner biome and our outer biome. This is really what we need to wake up for. What struck me today when I was walking the dogs, something that one of my granddaughters was saying to me the other day. Do you know, Nanny, she said, the reason that a baby bird pecks its way out of the shell is because inside becomes too toxic.
Now, interesting.
Well, that's what's going on now. This ability to detox our inner biome to start that more fulfilling life that really we can expect and work towards. It's a bit like being inside the shell, isn't it, at the moment? Close us all down, put you inside, hope it all becomes very toxic. But in fact, fortunately for so many people, they're realizing, where to go.
Yes.
And with Lawrence Broxmeyer, what he did with the Spanish flu, he looked to see where the large collections of dying took place and the predisposition of TB, and it absolutely correlated. And if you think of today with COVID, the highest incidence here on the island is around Liverpool. Well, what's the population of Liverpool? 80% Irish. So it is the Celtic, and by my observation, Jewish backgrounds of coming up through those stories. I mean, my background is totally Irish. So it's really interesting to understand this tubercular background. Where is it that TB was most prevalent, per head of the population? And he actually goes on, Broxmeyer, I further researched his work, and he had a lot to say about AIDS. And we always used to show all the DVDs to my students, the other side of AIDS and all of that. And so I researched to see what actually do people who develop AIDS die from. And there are 2 things, what they call AIDS-related pneumonia or AIDS-related dementia. And how I see it at the moment, because TB is the inability to keep calcium in the right place, what we're moving to not only is a remanifestation of the tubercular taint, but the high incidence of dementia.
Yeah.
The calcium, as you will know from Emma's teaching, is all about blood sugar, where you have to keep calcium levels even in your blood. Well, of course, if the blood sugar and therefore the oxygenation and everything else diminishes, then the brain cannot get the oxygen it requires. So it's, sorry.
I wanted to share there. We've been speaking amongst us leading into this COVID thing, and noticing that with the increase of flu vaccination, there's a huge link with dementia cases and memory lapses. And it's not just, as you said, vaccinations, but where that pattern was already emerging prior to this. So, my concern is that if people don't treat their clear-ins well during this time of COVID, where do you believe they will go into a deeper form of dementia if they go down the medical route as such?
Yes, I do. I mean, we know how COVID manifests itself. It's actually initially oxygen deprivation.
Yeah.
The hemoglobin cannot take in the oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to get partial and then complete organ failure. And it's at that point where the lungs fill up with fluid. And this is why the respirator should never, ever be used, because you're just trying to force against. But what is really interesting is that it's been noticed that they feel the hemoglobin level used to be much higher in people. And I'm sure it did, much higher than it is running at now, because the potential for inner oxygenation would have been much, much higher than it is now. Even within people who are thought to be healthy. And of course, that is entirely down to our biome, entirely down to what I was just describing at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because what people are constantly forgetting is transmutation. To have one element to transmute into another depends on the number of photons present and the number of molecules of oxygen. This is where it's at.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's how, as much as 5G isn't, the cause of this, or electromagnetic frequencies, it actually ties into the oxygen levels, doesn't it? Because if someone already has low hemoglobin and low oxygen, that will just exacerbate the situation, won't it, and increase the activity then of viral activity in the cell.
Absolutely. What it's doing is it's moving along those 16 stages, because it is a stress. So moving along those 16 stages, and actually you can research and see during those 16 stages the different inner things that take place, so you get bacterial, mycobacterial, etc. And what should be said is that Lawrence Broxmeyer and others are pointing out that COVID is not a virus. It's mycobacterial. And in form, it's almost identical to the TB.
Yes. It's pretty much all the same thing we're talking about, aren't we, when we're talking about any of the bacterial viral activities? It's the same lack of in the cell, isn't it? Or excess of toxicity and lack of oxygen, lack of, as you said, the photon energy accessibility to that. Yeah. I was just thinking as well when you were sharing that the things that people need right now, oxygen, vitamin D, movement to be able to keep the cells moving, the very things that people need actually they're not having because of isolation. It's an interesting one, isn't it, that we're told to isolate, yet it's vitamin D3 and oxygen and movement that actually helps us to get out of that picture. So people are doing the opposite to what they actually need.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many elderly people who they told to shield, etc. Incredible difficulty getting any fresh food. I mean, really, really difficult. And separating stress. So the whole thing is in complete opposition to what the story really is that's going on.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So can I just ask you about what happens when we don't receive our energy in the way that you've described and we actually become more glucose beings, if want for a better word, how we what that creates in the body and how that person's diet what that diet looks like, really. Can you explain that for us?
Yes, I mean, it doesn't necessarily get totally reflected in diet. So
Yeah.
what it is, because all of these organisms are within us all the time, and in perfect Besham, Gaston Leeson, Steiner, Reich, all of those great people understood that they will activate to create change.
Mm.
They don't create activity to kill you.
Yes.
You know, I was reading, it's a beautiful little book called ET 101. I don't know, it was given to me by a lady just at the end of her life. And I loved it, where she was actually, you know, talking about what we're doing as being at the top of the endangered species. But soon the only thing that will grow on our planet would be asphalt.
Mm.
And she's pointing out that a virus, when it creates havoc, is doing it in an ordered way in order to preserve its environment.
Mm.
But nothing about Western medicine does that.
Mm.
Absolutely does not preserve that at all. So going back to what you were saying, Emma, so it completely depends on the amount of oxygen availability, which of those activities are going to need to take place, be it bacterial, mycobacterial, viral, until we get to the almost anaerobic, and then we're in trouble, really.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because this is where you start getting cancerous manifestations, because it is almost anaerobic.
So you're coming completely from the point of view of the body's always working for us. We will never produce a virus or a bacteria unless it's entirely there to help our human evolution, really.
Yes, I wouldn't use the word produce a virus. I would say activate a virus.
Activate, yeah,
because, you know, it's all there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, you know, it's so important that we teach our children, in my case, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that transmutation and polymorphism are the two things that we've had removed from our language. Polymorphism is that one cell can change into a different form of cell. And this is what it's doing. I mean, you know, people wonder how cancer is created. Well, there is the answer. You know, it's all about the environment, the inner and the outer environment.
Yeah. Thank you. So there was a question in the sidebar around diet, and Lorraine was asking about keto, low carb, high carb, low fat. What's the best for cellular health at this time? Like, what's your view on that, Barbara?
Well, it's not a question I can answer. You know, I won't pan the computer around so you can see the endless books that almost over here, written about every conceivable approach. And my question always to the person is, are they talking about you? The person who wrote that book, are they addressing you? Which is why I will never answer a question without a case history.
Yeah.
Because do not look at the man's disease, look at the man himself. That is so important, you know, and, you know, that's all of that is what is lost in the Hippocratic Oath and the Pasteur approach and the modern medicine approach, you know. Right, let's go underneath that, Emma, before we look at that. And I'm just so excited that this has happened during my career. Gerald Pollack, when he came forward with the fourth phase of water, this is so important that you understand it. It is absolutely vital. So we are mainly water, and we wish the majority of that water to be in its fourth phase. So water exists, liquid, solid, gas, and fourth phase. And the fourth phase of water is H3O2, not H2O. And the reason it has become H3O2 is because it is water that has been charged up by the photons of light. So the water is turned into fourth phase water. And this is one ginormous battery. We are one enormous battery, receiving from above and below. This is where the energy comes. This is how we should be fueling ourselves. I remember years ago, in fact, when we were a student, Emma, I was looking at Joanna Budwig's work, and back then she was saying she was sure that we could get 60% of our energy from light. I kind of feel it may be 80-20, because when you think of the 16 stages of changing, you know, when you go from 80-20 to 20-80, it's the law of the 80-20.
Yeah.
And, you know, during this time of occupying planet Earth, something has changed enormously for this great need. And something that quite irritates me is, you know, when they're talking about, well, we need to reduce the population on the planet. No, we need to actually be able to be nurtured by our universe, and then everything would be fine. You know, we know the whole thing is a commercial venture, but that fourth phase of water, and where you find it is in the organically, beautifully grown fruit and vegetables. Yeah. And of course, if you can get hold of biodynamically grown, you're onto a real winner. Yeah. Steiner was beyond anybody in totally understanding it. And so just want to draw upon something. I have in front of me my most favorite lecture by Rudolf Steiner. Okay. And you can get hold of it if you want to by going to Steiner Archives. And I think it was 1926 that he gave this lecture. And it's called Problems of Nutrition. And I'm only picking out a couple of things. We must realize that plants represent the direct antithesis of men, and the animals represent the mean between the two. And so he goes on, because, you know, sometimes Steiner spoke a little bit in code, and he is talking about an energy that we have to produce. And if we eat mainly from the plant kingdom, the plants move in a very different way, because they're opposite to us. And we have to produce an inner flexibility to be able to utilize the nurturing from the plant kingdom. And if we eat mainly from the plant kingdom, and I would say to anybody who's a raw fooder, beware the amount of fat you take in, from what I'm going to tell you from this lecture. What Steiner is saying, if you eat naturally of the plant kingdom, and remember when he was alive, you didn't have bags of nuts and a dozen avocados. He said it would be naturally low in fat. And he said, what happens then is the body produces its own inner fat. Because you produce this inner flexibility to utilize the plant kingdom, to incorporate them into your being, and you produce your own inner fat. He says, of course, he said, if man chooses to incorporate the animal kingdom to any degree and get the animal fats, he doesn't have to do that. The job's done for him. However, he says that when a man is forced to produce the forces that make it possible for him to produce fat on his own, then through his inner flexibility, the ego and the astral body become master of the physical and etheric bodies. When man eats fat, he resultingly is spared the task of producing fat himself. Yet if he takes the opportunity to unfold his own inner activity through producing his own fat, he is made free and thus becomes Lord over his body. Otherwise, as a spiritual being, he remains a mere spectator. And there is such wisdom in that. These are all aspects that we're not taught. And this was crucial in my career, because as Emma will know, because I knew Emma a long time ago, you know, we were using more oils and that sort of thing. And then I had a really dreadful time because, you know, it was Hay House who came to pester me to write the book, which I never ever thought of writing. And after Cellular Awakening, they wanted me to write again. And I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I do not agree with all of this fat and oil. The universe had sent too many people to me where I could see the issues with this. And my friend Judy, who also had been a student, and I hadn't realized, but I'd introduced her to Steiner, and so she trained, and she lives down there in Michael Hall, as it happens. And she said, I don't know why it jumped out, but Barbara, this lecture is for you, and sent it to me. And so that gave me the courage and sort of knowledge to write the second book, where it approaches all of that very differently. Mm-hmm. But it's so interesting that this inner fat, you see, I associate fat and oil with light, mm-hmm. because, you know, we burn oil, people burn fat, you know, and they used in the temples, you know, the anointing room, where they mix the oils to bring in different energies. So I think we need to do a lot of thinking. And certainly if we're talking about the ketogenic diet, my goodness, one has to really support the kidneys.
It's a huge amount of fat, isn't it, there really, as well, you know, which would impact the liver and so on. Yeah. Yes. So that's why we use castor oil so much in our teachings, Barbara. And yes. Would you say that was one of the huge gifts now, to be able to implement that during the time where we need to increase our light, increase our photons?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
I think the technique's so important. And
the techniques, yes, for sure.
Just something that would be useful for people as practitioners. What we find is people with let's call it the tubercular taint, are more than likely to have come into this world celiac. Yes. And you all will know what celiac is, the inability to absorb. And people think of it as a sensitivity to gluten, but it has a stage well before that. And the stage before it is the inability to be able to handle fats easily.
Yeah.
And so if that is the situation, remembering it's a liver condition, the liver is the organ which looks after hydration, you find then people eating fats and oils more than their body can cope with without asking the question, what they've been reading. Then, of course, the bile doesn't break it down. It goes through the lacteals in the villi, finds itself into the lymph. You get turgid lymph, lack of movement, stagnation, and then into the blood and creating difficulty for oxygenation. So all of that and the fat handling is so important, I feel, Emma,
yes.
In what you've just been asking, you know, with the different diets. And of course, with the body, sorry, interrupting, that of course we have to remember that our body temperature has dropped. And then when I was nursing, it was 98.4, now it's 97.4. And of course, if you make things colder, then of course fats and oils don't flow so easily. And so we know that if the body temperature has dropped by 1%, the metabolic efficiency of a person's body drops by 10%.
Wow.
Which is huge, isn't it? Mm. When you think how, you know, so many people, of course we look at thyroid being the controller of that, but for me it's important to look, what is it underneath it? What went underneath it? Look at it in the bigger picture. Look at yourself within the universe, you know, the enormous biome of what is going on with all of that. So I think looking at all of this, Emma, you know, is the thing obviously that's going to draw one to the different approaches, totally depending, again, never could it be a bigger statement. Look at the person, not what they, you know,
yes.
The name of the diet. Kind of
there's kind of patterns there, like you said, isn't there? Inability to absorb, inability to digest grains, inability yes. to digest high levels of fats, and also yes. what I was going to say then, Barbara, when you were speaking, I know it's a lecture for another time, but with the increase of veganism on the planet, which is huge,
yes.
For me that screams out an increase in huge levels of not only the good fats but the hydrogenated fats, you know, all this rapeseed oil and different things. Has everyone got their mics off on the background? I can hear a feedback on the sound.
But
So you got your mics off, everyone. Thank you.
um,
Yeah, so it's, you know,
yeah,
the increase of the processed fats in all these sort of, you know, fake meats and all that sort of thing. And then the fact is people are loading their diet with nuts and seeds and things because of the, you know,
yeah,
low calorie effect of veganism. And then that compounds the situation, really, doesn't it?
yeah. No, it's really, well, it's all fascinating, isn't it? And also, you were mentioning grains, Emma.
Yeah.
The thing that we're suffering from is dehydration.
Mm-hmm.
We are so below capacity.
Yeah.
In the liver having that ability, and I know we're thinking of doing another webinar focusing more onto this.
Yeah.
But when I started practicing nearly 50 years ago now, it would have been, please could you leave out wheat? Then it would be gluten. And now it's all grains with the sort of people who come to me. And they're usually people who are suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar, psychotic, you know, extreme positions.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the trouble with grains is they're going to trigger the insulin pathway, because even they are too sweet. And of course, the two types of diabetes, diabetes mellitus and diabetes insipidus, are fluid issue. Blood sugar is a fluid issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the electrolytes have to keep the fluid. And those two forms of diabetes, the person would urinate to the point of death, but it wasn't recognized. And so this is what we're finding, particularly you notice with things like chronic fatigue, this really erratic urination picture, some days vast quantities and others not. It's the loss of this ability. And so really one of the main things when you're looking, in fact, the main thing, when you're working with somebody to establish the sort of diet, it is to hold a stable blood sugar and not to cause more dehydration.
Yes.
Because if we do, we're going to get more stagnation, we're going to get more disease.
Yes.
So, you know, it isn't possible to say which of any of those diets. It really has to be tailor-made to the story. But I absolutely, totally agree with you about veganism. I'll just use the word once. People who come to me, as I say, are in those extreme situations so often. And I used to study with the late Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, who taught me about pyroluria, which was very rare. It's called the anxiety disease, and now it's everywhere. And if people go vegan, and that is ticking away, it's a recipe for disaster. But we are planning to do more.
So we'll do a lecture on that, Barbara. That would be great.
Yeah.
I wanted to share as well is that with the influx of electromagnetic frequencies, I really saw a big change in my clients and in my own body and my family's body. We have to give up grains, really. We find that to hold that fluid balance, even for myself, I've been practicing this work for 25 years. I find that grains now are too challenging compared to where I was at even sort of 10 years ago, you know. So we're talking about, you know, a diet for high vitality, not just a diet to survive, isn't it, and switch off symptoms. So the grain-free diet for me increases vitality, increases light, increases energy, and we kind of live by that. And it's not because we're allergic, it's to do with actually how it feels in the body. For personally, as you said, it's got to be a personal thing. So
I mean, I always ask the question, what purpose do you wish your nutrition? You know, what is the purpose of it? And you know, I think ultimately people will be able to transcend enough to the point of veganism, but this is a journey and they've come for help. And you know, it's so important that we look at it to get back to that cell membrane potential. That's where we're driving at. So the transmutation, the alchemy can take place. So important. And yes, I agree with you. You know, all of this electromagnetic stress, when you think we're a giant battery, is enormous, absolutely enormous. So, as you know, in 1921, Steiner predicted an evil web would surround the planet. That lecture is still available. And he was saying that the influence of that, the effect of it, could be that it could so lower the resonance of man to only just above the mineral kingdom. And that the antidote was to spend as much time as possible in nature. And so, you know, that is where I see the picture, you know, where, you know, in his teachings, in so many teachings, you know, he was saying, he was using as a timeline since the time of Christ, we are in such a deep, dark, gross form that we must ascend. He's talking about raising the vibration. And so it's no good thinking I'm going to live on vegetables and grains if the grains are offering this challenge and removing the fluid, because the most important thing we have to remember is that water, the fluid in the body, is our central nervous system. And water, fourth phase water, is the only thing that holds perfect messages. So if you want to bring in the perfect messages of the universe into your body, then this is what you need to be creating. So it isn't which of the many kind of diets, it's looking at it in the whole in that way. Yeah.
Thank you. There was a question from Natalie in the bar saying, actually, if viruses are from within, how come there's a mass activation happening? And that leads me on to the questions around what is actually happening in the bigger picture within the universe.
Yeah.
And Barbara, when we first met in '96, in your classes you were talking about the photon band and how we were ultimately moving towards being able to access light in a more available way, and therefore our diet would need to change along that sort of journey. And for sure it has, you know, from starting with you in 1996, how that diet has refined over the years and got to a point now where I'm just so grateful to have received that learning, to be able to take full advantage of this time that we're in and to be able to raise our frequency ultimately. So the question is, what is the photon band? What's happening in the universe? And why are we having a mass activation, in Natalie's words,
yes,
at this time?
Yeah. You know, I mean, we've got two things mixed up here, really, haven't we?
Yes.
You know, I mean, we've got Pastor Besham kicking in there as well.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to this point now where we're in a mess. We've not kept the universal laws, which I absolutely think we're at that critical point. And this is where we have to take responsibility. It's not what somebody outside has done. Collectively, we have broken all of the natural rhythms and laws. You know, we've created Western medicine, all of those things that have got us to this pitch. Then along comes the amazing universe. I mean, my kids are just so bored, you know, it's always, no, the universe will prevail. And Emma's had it hammered in as well. You know, this, you know, to think that we have any influence beyond that is just completely insane, beyond insanity. So what is this all about? Also, this shows, you know, don't just talk about our universe, forget that. Our galaxy moves around the greater sun called Alcyone. This is a major, major sun, much more powerful than our sun. And our galaxy moves around Alcyone in a very elliptical way. So if you think of it being tightly elliptical, there will be 2 points when it's closest into Alcyone. Yeah? And so for want of understanding, they divided it into 12. It takes about 26,000 years for our galaxy to go all the way around Alcyone. So divide it into 12 and give it the astrological divisions. And so what you find is 2 of them are what we call the photon belt, and the other 10 are galactic night, because they're moving further away in different degrees. And each phase lasts for about 2,000 years. The last time we were in the photon belt was the age of Leo. And so now we just entered on the 5th of April this year, the age of Aquarius. wasn't in 2012 when people were speaking about it. And this particular photon belt, now that we're in, is much more powerful than the one that was in the age of Leo. Seem to have something on screen. Linda Wyatt, have you?
Oh,
that's right.
Something's happened to mine. Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I'd lost you then. Yes, so this particular photon belt of 2,000 years is far more powerful even than the one before. You know, it has many aspects to its functioning. The ability to remove karma. And when I'm using the word karma, I'm using the word predisposition. For me, the craziest thing in this world is people don't think predispositions are important. Why have I been banging on about the tubercular miasm? You know,
so inherited family history of illnesses.
Yes. You know, why we've chosen to come to these parents, why we've chosen this line, why in the case history it's very important. You know, and people have laughed over the years, you know, when they brought me a case history of something, I'd say, go and find the TB. And they'd look at me, and then a couple of weeks later, oh yeah, the grandmother had TB, or whoever. And what I should add here is that they're now testing for latent TB. And their solution to that is 6 months of antibiotics, where they have to have weekly blood tests because it might cause liver collapse.
Wow.
And they're thinking of bringing the BCG back. So this whole tubercular thing is known. You know, it's not just me talking about a tubercular taint.
Yes.
So we're living in this extraordinary time where it doesn't matter what they do, the photon activity couldn't be greater.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know, if we want to talk about dark forces, so be it. But they know perfectly well, you know, the cabal who have been running things since the mid-1600s, behind all of this, taking over all the monetary systems, all of those things. All of these people who depend upon our energy, however you wish to define energy, after all, money is stored energy. So all of that in that way is what is going on. So it is such an extraordinary time to be alive, you know, because there's everything that we can do now to raise our vibration. Everything. So
would you say light is our major nutritional source right now because of this photon energy coming through? Is that,
I would say light has always been our major nutritional source.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we're being given this enormous help, by the universe.
So almost like a mass awakening is happening, but in order to get into that place where we're accessing our full potential, people have to clear their karmic load or their toxic load as such, which when you're saying about karma releasing, predispositions releasing, that in a way it's a bit like the toxicity load, isn't it, that we inherit?
Yes, it's totally that predispositional picture that I've always been interested in, because, you know, if we talk of karma in the other way, of course it's going to have a physical, you know, one has to remember there's a physical representation of everything we talk about in the teaching as well. And so we've got that potential, but of course what is so terrible is that we've got a big divide now. We had a big divide over Brexit. We've got an even bigger one now between the people who are terrified and swallowing everything and those who are not. But, you know, you might like to look into we've got Steiner talking about the need for ascension, which is exactly what they're talking about, Dolores Cannon and all of those people. And it's this time now. And of course, it's all about the shift from the third dimension to the fifth.
Yes.
But in order to get to the to the fifth, you have to go through the fourth. And the fourth is the astral. And the astral is where all the fear is. So it seems to me that what is being manifested in terms of Steiner's teaching is we're in the astral phase. And so it's important, you know, for education, empowerment, to lose the fear, to be able to ascend, because fear would arrest raising the vibration like nothing else. You know?
It's incredible, Barbara, to think about it in that way, because it's been, even if we're not necessarily in fear ourselves, there's this resonance that happened when this all kicked off, which was incredibly destabilizing. And I think homeopaths were saying if we could give everyone aconite at this point, you know, that would be helpful, you know, aconite for fear. But actually it belongs to the balance of fluid, isn't it? The water balance, because kidneys rule water, fear. So it is like a mass clearing of fear on such a big level, and that makes total sense, that the fact that that's the astral plane, moving into the astral plane and then beyond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, the darker side can play havoc when you're into the astral. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Very, very important.
So if someone hasn't had the journey that we have had with nutrition and refining diet over many years and accessing light, and they're at the early stages, this increase of photon energy that's coming in will be activating all sorts of or clearing all sorts of toxicity from the cells. And so what would be your advice around, apart from having a consultation with you or me, what would be the advice around for people who are in that space of almost being stuck in fear right now?
Well, you know, it comes down to how open-minded people are, isn't it? You know, surely it's time to say, look, this lot isn't working.
Yes.
And even if it's only to realise that the people who had last year's flu vaccine are the ones they noticed firstly in Italy, didn't they? That they were the ones who were dying.
Yes.
You know, I mean, then you do a bit more research and you come across the Gates Foundation and, you know, job done, basically. But then you look at who's backing the Gates Foundation and you get to this cabal of this, you know, the people, names that we've all known.
Yes.
And very much controlled by the presidents of America, because since JFK, it's been a bunch of psychopaths until we get to now, you know. And of course, it's represented in every possible way. If people look at the monetary system, whichever system. So really, I feel it's a mega educational thing first, because only education empowers. And once people are empowered, then they can lose their fear.
Mm-hmm.
They can then start to trust their body, because only it can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, as we say, the water element is the central nervous system. And interesting that 5%, you know, pyroluria, for example, was fairly rare and known as the anxiety. Now, of course, we've got the anxiety syndrome everywhere. So, you know, I think it's gently, and I'm not really just so interested in people who, I mean, that's, you know, it's always, I love working with people, of course I do. But I think it's more stretching it out to a wider audience, the understanding, you know, but most particularly the understanding of what the education systems are doing, what, you know, where it's our children, isn't it?
Yes.
Where it is this huge focus, because with deterioration, excuse the, if you hear a funny growling, it's the little Laura who wants to join in. Yeah. So I really do think that, but I'm trying to answer your question. Really, it's to get to know yourself, isn't it? To get to know your story, to look at the family story, look at the predispositions, look at the different things that we react to. Why are we reacting to them? You know, Elsie, lie down.
she feels passionate about this.
Good girl. Good girl. Yeah, you know, it's never been bigger the challenge, and it's never been more rewarding, I feel, because the energy is so with us to do it, you know.
It feels like it's the prime time for naturopathic work. It feels, you know, that this is a huge gift right now, to be able to know, have access to the naturopathic techniques, to be able to understand that the only way we can raise our frequency is to change what we put in, and how well we hydrate. And reducing the fear is such a big thing, because as you've taught me over the years, it's the very thing that stops us from doing anything. So we can't move forward effectively if we're in fear. And as you said earlier, we attract all sorts of negative energies towards us if we're in
absolutely
fear. And that whole idea that everything is outside ourselves, which is what a lot of people are thinking, you know, the virus is outside of us, therefore we do not have any control or responsibility. And even on the other side of it, where, you know, the conspiracy theorists or the truth theorists, where they're given lots of views of what's going wrong with the world, but they're not giving solutions. And that sets people into fear, doesn't it? So, which again isn't helpful for where we're at now, where we want to evolve and move into this fifth dimension. So it's putting the spotlight back on us and taking personal responsibility, isn't it? And
absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. We've had too much of people just throwing all these negative random points, you know. It doesn't get us anywhere. You know, we're responsible for having created it. They didn't suddenly appear.
No,
you know,
exactly.
And that's the easy thing for people to think, oh my goodness, you know, all this stuff that's happened. But no, it's so important to own everything. We chose to be here. And also really spending as much time as we can in nature. You know, you know, bringing the children up, used to growing, trying to move back more to the more biodynamic way of growing things, and that appreciation. I need more and more people to, I mean, for example, Michael Mansfield, that top QC, it's actually from the Southwest that he's taking the government to court against 5G. So, you know, like-minded people.
Rally together.
And he is also taking the government to task over the destruction of the Steiner Academy schools, which has gone on down here from crowdfunding from Bristol. Excuse me. And Elsie, stop it.
That's
to join in.
I'm just going to run through my questions, make sure I've covered everything, and then I'll take people's questions that have been posted.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly share which nutrients are important for increasing light within the cell?
Yes. I mean, there's no doubt the most important thing is vitality in food, isn't it? You know, plenty of green. I mean, I always think that life starts with a green leaf, doesn't it, of some sort, you know, to be incorporating as much of that, you know.
So green smoothies, green juice.
Absolutely. And, but I mean, be cautious of just throwing that out to anybody, because obviously they'd have a mega elimination, you know. But D3, I think, you know, I always remember being asked out to coffee by the man who does the nano minerals, Steve, and we met near here, and I very provocatively, to get things going, said, I don't know why you bother. Why do you not just produce nano gold? Because monatomic gold is the ultimate conductor between heaven and earth. Why do you need to bother with all the other minerals? And he became very defensive, you know, but by the end of talking for about an hour, I said, I think I know where you're coming from. And I would put monatomic gold in the same category as D3.
There's lots of people on this call who already use gold. And D3, even though we're having lots of sunlight right now, because of the limitation of people being outdoors, that's something to really focus on, isn't it? I'm certainly taking it, and I do go outdoors now.
Well, of course, the thing to remember, it's the cure for TB. You know, and they used to take people to the sanatorium up in the Swiss mountains, that sort of thing, to have that pure light. Outdoor schools, all of that sort of thing. Sleeping outside. So
wow. So really, people need to be outside all of the time right now to cure these symptoms, rather than be indoors.
Well, you know, Steiner, an hour inside the children, you get an hour outside immediately afterwards.
Steiner was a genius, really, let's face it. So everything that he writes.
Absolutely.
So Danielle was asking, how long is this new cycle that we've just moved into?
2,000 years.
2,000 years, okay. Thank you.
It'll give you long enough, Danielle.
You mentioned when we were on a call together around the Mayan calendar ending in 2022 on your birthday, and
yeah.
And is there relevance there as well in terms of what's happening to us now, leading into that sort of ending?
It's 2024.
2024. Okay.
Yeah, because you remember when the reading list had the Pleiadian agenda on
yes,
it?
I've recently reread it. Yeah, the Pleiadian agenda for anyone who wants to read that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because on at that particular date in 2024, it is that the Pleiadian group, you know, constellation, is in line with our sun and us, and that complete lineup. Yeah, and so that is a completion of this phase. Yeah,
that's going to be huge then, Barbara, isn't it, in terms of the access to energy, the access to light. Yeah.
Yes, we're in a very peak place at the moment to access all of this. Yeah, so the potential, you know, the potential for a huge amount of transmutation, and for people to rediscover alchemical things. You know, I expect to see a lot of natural energy being established during this phase, all of that kind of thing. All the blueprints are there. It just needs, you know, and, you know, hearing about the Federal Reserve being taken back into the American government is a first step of taking the power away from that consortium of people who've been running things for so long. Yeah.
So the film that you recommended, JFK to 9/11, is that what it was called? That really explains that, doesn't it, for people who haven't explored that route? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 3-hour-long documentary.
Yeah, thank you. And this all kicked off, the COVID virus, around March, you know, sort of so pretty much December actually, with the seasonal change, and then we had another resurgence in spring equinox. We have some eclipses in June, and then of course we have the autumn equinox. Then what do you predict there, and what should people be doing in preparation?
Well, of course we've had 3 flus. First of all, we had influenza B at the beginning of the year, and December. Then we had influenza A, and then we had COVID. Yeah. What do I predict? I think they'll do another lockdown.
Yes.
Just to make it look, because obviously in this powerful time, the solstice, of course, which we've got coming, and the equinoxes are going to be very, very powerful. You know, so the ability of the body to let go for change and to come into harmony will be very, very strong. Yeah, but you know, it's for people, you know, to acknowledge even that equinoxes are powerful, and you know, it's that free time. Yeah,
absolutely, they're so powerful, aren't they? Because over the years that I've practiced, you know, people having flare-up of symptoms during those times, and being able to understand it is so important to be able to work effectively with people. And I really believe that the government must know this as well, because why are they predicting another, you know, flare up in October? You know, they must have this information, and to know that they can see patterns just like we can. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say the government. Those are well above the government.
Yes.
The manipulators. Of course they do. They use the astrology all the time. Yeah. Which is why it's important not to attach to it, but just to see who has been running the show. And what I just wanted to say is a huge acknowledgement. Of course, that film called JFK to 9/11, it starts with the First World War, but when you stop and think of the sterling work that Robert Kennedy Jr. is doing, because of course his father was killed 6 years after JFK, for wanting to reveal this group of people who were running the shot. And you know, on the 4th of May, he won his lawsuit against the Gates Foundation to reveal the content of vaccines. So, you know, these extraordinary people.
That really deserves a clap, doesn't it? Wow. It's so really incredible. Yeah. The 16 stages that you were talking about, Barbara, can you actually give the author's name again, please?
Heinrich Kremler. Let me just get it so I give you.
Okay,
I know
thank you.
where it is. Where it is. No, I can't put my hands straight on it. No, I can. Heinrich Kremler.
I can post it out to people anyway. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
yeah.
Thank you.
A German. It was sent to me as soon as it was translated by a German student. Yeah. And
It's easy to find, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm just thinking where else. It's in Cellular Awakening.
Yeah. So for
well.
people who haven't read Barbara's books, Cellular Awakening was her first book, and the second one is Return to the Light. And it really explains in a very simple and powerful way what we've been speaking about today around cellular health and the fact that we actually use light in order to energize ourselves. And it's really wonderful to read. So please have a look at those books. And also Barbara does consultations if anyone is interested in that. And so you can get, I'll put those details on the email. Barbara, is that okay?
Well, that's fine, Emma.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just something that I'd like to put in also. When I was talking about the cell membrane potential as being the most important thing, you know, I hope everybody's read The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. You know, that was sent to me as soon as it was published and said, you know, we've been banging on about this forever. He is talking about the way you live your life, your thoughts, your actions are the biggest influence on the cell membrane, more than your genetic makeup.
Wow.
And I think it's very, very important to look at that at this moment in time.
Yes, yeah.
So what the intention is so important.
Yeah. And I guess going back to what you said around the big divide, it's incredibly sad that we're in a time where we have access to so much knowledge, so much information, yet we're fighting with each other around, you know, different subjects. And hopefully this is the start of the awakening that will come, where we'll all join together in the community again and become united rather than opposing. You know, it's almost like we have to go through this clearing to be able to see where we're at, really. One of the questions that someone had is, how do you actually reduce fear in someone who's quite closed-minded?
Well, I mean, it's very, very difficult, isn't it? I mean, I'll tell you what I would do. I'd take over all the media. I mean, that's where, you know, they've got everything to answer for, the media.
Absolutely.
Criminal. Absolutely criminal.
Just for myself as an observer, I don't have a television, but I do obviously get information through social media and online. My students, I always get the information anyway, but it comes to me in a much more sort of balanced way, rather than having to sit and experience that energy that comes off the television when we're being programmed in that way. And when I visit my parents and I walk into their home, because they do watch the television quite a lot, I feel fear in the atmosphere. It's really strong, and that's resonating, you know, around people if they're reading a lot or watching a lot of it for the media sort of stuff. And I think the best thing that we can do to start with, as you said, is limit our time that we spend watching this stuff, and especially newspapers. You know, it's full of fear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember, Emma, how I used to say, what do I need to create a pandemic? All I need is a drug that I want to use and to own the media companies. All you need if you want to create a pandemic.
Yes.
We've got the Gates Foundation producing God knows what, and you know, control of the media they have. You know, it's got to stop. The media needs closing down, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It needs to be answerable.
And it's possible, isn't it, that we're moving into that place where people are waking up to this, and there will be a time where these things will be questioned more, and it's certainly happening now, isn't it? But it's going to happen in a bigger way as this situation progresses.
Yes, yeah. I think it's a gift. I think there's a huge awakening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can't deny the power of the universe. It's going to be greater than anything. You know, they're either going to frighten themselves to death, these people, or they're going to change.
Yeah. The fact that Bill Gates has been challenged and he is answerable now to certain things is such a huge step, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the lecture that you suggested for Steiner is called The Problems of Nutrition, 1926.
I think it's 1926. It's funny translation. It's called Problems of Nutrition. Yes.
Yeah.
It's on Steiner Archives.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
And also from the Anthroposophical Society in Baker Street, you can get hold of his a sort of review of his lecture to do with the internet in 1921. It's a lecture in Dona, where he talked about the evil web surrounding the planet.
That's interesting. Thank you. So Talia, you were questioning mainstream education when you've been listening to Barbara around Steiner speaking. Is there anything else you want to say around that, or anything you'd like to ask Barbara?
Sorry, I just put my microphone on. Hi. Yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of mainstream education, but it seemed like it was where I live, in my location, my only option really, apart from home educating. And my question would be is, if I decided my children were going back into mainstream education, that feels really jarring with what's happening in the world right now, and the fact that they're running this mainstream narrative that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make any sense. And yeah, my question would be, and maybe I've answered my own question there really. Yeah, what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think there'll be more collections of people sharing home ed, that sort of thing. I mean, for example, you know, if you watch the JFK to 9/11, I mean, it blows apart completely anything one thought about about history that's being taught. You know, I mean, everything's up for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know? No, it doesn't have to be a problem, but I think the main thing is realizing that it's a pile of nonsense what they're indoctrinating the children with, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and whatever they call them, the people who come marching around, you know, setting all the rules, charging vast amounts of money to come to supervise to see if it's all happening properly. I mean, it only takes a minute to see through it.
Yeah.
And it's all about money, isn't it, as well? You know.
Yeah. Thank you.
And of course, what worries me is the Steiner schools are not really being Steiner schools anymore. You know, I mean, that man taught true spiritual science. It's what he called it, and it really is what it is. And you know, it's kind of interesting that our government wants to close it down, isn't it? You know, if you bring spirit into the equation and recognise there's heaven and earth, and we're in between it, you've got a bit of a time bomb going on. And it does worry me that these academy schools, and two of my grandchildren, the one in Exeter, has now been bought out by some Hindu company, and they tried to buy Michael Hall as well. Interestingly, the one they've never tackled is Totnes. I mean, they get more than they bargained for. They went down trying to take it.
They're very united there, aren't they, in terms of how they've opposed that? Yeah,
well, of course, the lovely thing, and it's where I've worked most of my life, Totnes, only 1/3 of the children in Totnes are vaccinated.
Yes.
And that was about 8 years ago. I'd imagine it's even less than 1/3 now.
Yeah, it's very hard for Steiner schools to exist now. Certainly the Cardiff one, you know, comes up against it with, you know, systems like vaccinations, for example. In order to exist, they have to sort of, you know, propagate that in one sense. Yeah. Again, corruption. Yeah.
It's got to stop. It really has got to stop. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else from anyone? Anyone want to switch their mic on to ask a question to Barbara while we've got her?
I just wanted to say a huge thank you for a fabulous hour or so. It just feels so fabulous now. Thank you, Barbara.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith.
an absolute pleasure. I really mean it, an absolute pleasure. You know, and I think, you know, the job now is to get out there and share more expansive ways of looking at things, isn't it? That's all it takes, just, you know, pushing the boundaries in people, you know, and yeah, I mean, it's not going to be easy. My youngest lives in the same village as me, and last night there were, I don't know, about 6 of them, you know, all with their 2 meters apart on the big lawn, and one neighbour came out and photographed them. So there's a huge amount of work, isn't there, you know? And, you know, I mean, I'm 80 now, so as part of the really old generation, that's where so much of the fear is. They've made everybody frightened. But when you stop and think, you know, these care homes, you show me one person in a care home who's not on masses of medication. You know, it's all of this analysis that should be going on, isn't it? You know, what else was going on with these people who died? And, you know, at least they are decent enough to say died with COVID, not from it. You know, it's just been a massive, you know, shocking thing that's gone on. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it, David Baxter, yeah.
Yeah, just one question. Years and years ago, nurse training used to be actually done within the hospitals themselves.
Sorry, which training?
Nurse training used to be done in the hospitals themselves directly.
Yes.
And there was a great emphasis on fresh air and light. I can remember that myself.
Yeah.
And then we moved into universities and research-based nursing. What effect do you think that's actually had on the increase that we've sort of seen in not only medications, but also in people's unwellness, I should really call it, I think. They have long-term periods of unwellness rather than short periods of unwellness.
Oh, I mean, it's got everything to do with it. I was a nurse at St Mary's starting in the late 1950s, and we had to be on the ward at 6 o'clock in the morning to clean the ward, you know?
Yeah.
And on Saturdays, we had to descale the fish kettle, you know, and clean the sluice. And take and always took the flowers out at night and brought them back in the daytime. It's got everything to do with it. And when I was off duty, you'd go and give somebody a pedicure or a manicure or whatever, you know. And anything that was a scam going on, you could see it. You absolutely could. I think, you know, and of course, I think the worst thing that they're doing at the moment in this big social experiment is denying proximity, one human to another, because there was so much of that. You know, you take nurses off the ward. What on earth are you taking them off the ward? They become technicians. They're not nurses. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I've noticed myself going into these care homes is the fact that they've actually been shut away from human contact for, I think it's now 16 weeks.
Wow.
16, 17 weeks, I think it is, because the nursing homes went into shutdown way before we went into lockdown. And you can actually sort of see that the will to live is going because they've not got that human contact and that closeness. And you sort of see the fade now that the last 4 weeks we've been wearing full masks. And again, that not being able to see the face makes a real big difference. So you can sort of see that there needs to be that human interaction and also that ability to go outside and be part of society, really, isn't it? You know, so, which I've never seen before in all my years of nursing, is it's always been family contact, it's always been fresh air, it's always been sunshine, it's always been clean environment.
Yeah, and making them happy, not scaring them to death. Yeah.
What's the death rate been like in the care home you've been going into, David Baxter?
I mean, I have actually been into one. I started a 5-night stint. When I started, we were at 34. At the end of my 5th night, we're down to 22. So that was within 5 nights. We lost some. You could sort of see that they hadn't seen a family, what have you, could see them shutting down, which was sad to see. One unexpected, which I think was probably an acute heart attack or something like that, you know, something quite catastrophic.
You were sharing with us last time how some of those people who died had COVID written on their death certificate, but they didn't die of COVID,
Absolutely.
Yeah, the acute one that we had, you know, sort of, they'd actually been checked an hour before. Somebody had actually spent an hour with them doing their nails, as you were sort of saying, encouraging them to eat. They'd actually had a meal, a small little tiny meal, and within that hour frame of handover and us going in, the person actually passed away. Obviously, because it was unexpected, you have to notify, you know, so the police come in.
Yeah.
The ambulance came in and she said, well, you know, yes, we can see the person's dead. Between the ambulance arriving and then the police turning up, it was then COVID-19.
Oh my
By the time the undertakers come in, it was definitely COVID-19. And they actually had more protection on them than we did, you know, so it was interesting.
Wow.
But I'm also looking at a recent report coming out of Korea, South Korea. And they're sort of saying is that the test that we're using for COVID-19 actually gives false positives.
Yeah.
So you can actually be over the infection. So your own immune system has actually got over the infection, what have you, but you still have that trace marker. So you're not actually infected to anybody. You're over it, but it will still show up for, I think it's 2 to 3 weeks after you're completely safe. And it will still show up that you've actually got it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, another interesting bit of research.
That's all part of the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
but I was just sort of wondering, because obviously I sort of saw the move from where we trained on the ward, and we had a very good ward sister who was very much on cleanliness and getting fresh air in and light, to this university-based medication is the only way. You know, sort of, we saw suddenly that the windows were closed. You know, we can't have fresh air coming in. We can't have, you know, artificial lighting. And then you sort of see this, whereas you'd have short periods of unwellness, you've got this long, maligned unwellness. And as you were sort of saying, this increase in medications. So they start off with 1 or 2, and then within a year or 2, they've got 20, 30 medications. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's the very things you were talking about again, Barbara: lack of oxygen, lack of vitamin D3, lack of movement.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely dreadful. Yeah.
Oh, could I ask a question?
Inside. Yeah.
Someone else speak? Sorry, I didn't hear.
That's me, Bill Sage here.
Bill, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Just to clarify a question that was put forward earlier about the nature of this spandemic, I call it, how it affects so many people when it comes from within. Because a very interesting one, that.
Yes, but you see, this is why you need to know how many people had the flu vaccine. We know in Italy, they were the ones who were taken off. So if they're all living inside you, these viruses, and then another action is taken upon that person to weaken their environment, then the chaos of trying to rectify the problem is going to show up. And it's like Emma was saying, you know, we had the winter solstice, we had the spring equinox, and you know, if you just look, you've got all of these things, and you've got the overall much bigger thing for change going on as well.
The planetary change, And it was interesting for me as a practitioner during last year, I was listening to people share that whereas before people would have yearly updates with flu vaccine, they were having them every 6 months. So like, you know, over vaccinating, plus people have already got predispositions. We've then got a big astrological shift happening.
Yeah, but you know, it's crazy. But there's no other illness that you have a vaccine every year for.
Absolutely.
So if you do it every year, you're going to culture up the need for the body to show up a much more dramatic reaction to it. It's got to get bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, and something we've spoken about, Barbara, is that when we had the HIV sort of surge of that, they said at the time you can't have a vaccine for a virus. Yet now they're saying there's a possible vaccine for a virus. So it's sort of, everything is a bit contradictory right now, isn't it?
It's more than contradictory. It's called genocide.
Insane, yeah.
Definitely genocide.
Genocide.
Yeah.
And so is your prediction that we won't get this vaccine put out? Do you predict that?
I've never ever felt that there would be mandatory vaccination in this country. Do not ask me why. It's obviously in my waters. I've never ever thought. I think it will restrict air travel if there are any airlines left.
Yes.
You know, various things. But, you know, there are nurseries and things who insist on vaccination for children or don't take them there. Do you know what I mean? I've always felt this country would maintain that.
Yeah.
But more work by people like Robert Kennedy and more people amassing in that way.
Yeah.
No, I mean this is the rising up of the human spirit, and you know it's so interesting that Kabbalah have actually allowed vaccines to be the focus of their destruction.
Yes.
So it's bound to get all of the attention. Bound to.
In the time when I was training with you, you always said that vaccines were the biggest thing that would suppress our human potential.
Yes.
And over the years, those vaccines have increased and really almost spun out of all logic, you know, in terms of what people are getting now. That it's really obvious to me that that's what's holding everyone back from being able to move into this lighter energy that we're talking about. And it's so obvious when I see vaccinated compared to unvaccinated adults or children in terms of what we're talking about, the potential really. And, you know, I was vaccinated myself, but I had to do a lot of work on myself to get into a position where I'm in an energized state now compared to before. And
well,
so,
I think we both had a very unique experience. My father didn't believe in vaccines, but to go to St Mary's in Paddington, I had to have vaccination. And within 6 months, or less than 6 months of the BCG, I developed anorexia. Now I have one brother who has 4 children, and Emily, who is his second daughter, who's I suppose like me, she happens to be a GP now. She was given it, and within 3 months she was hospitalised with anorexia and self-harming, as happens these days. And you know, when journalists used to say, would I write articles, I would say, yeah, I'll write articles for you, but would you please publish this? They'd say, no, it's absolutely not scientifically proven. I said, it's clinically evident. You know, that would be a big move if we could go by clinical evidence instead of this stupid, funded, you know, contorted scientific stuff that's going on.
And I think most people know on the call that that's what happened to me. I had the BCG as a teenager. I went into anorexia within 6 months of that. And my grandmother, who wasn't into vaccines, and she didn't vaccinate my mother, said I was a different person after that vaccine. I went from healthy to mentally and emotionally a very different person. And so that was the turning point for me too, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's bound to be. I mean, it changes one's life. It really does. And, you know, to think that there are things around there to do that. And that's what they're talking of bringing the BCG back in. That's absolutely incredible. No, but the positive thing, Emma, is you will also remember that I've always believed that vaccines will be the thing that breaks it all down.
Yes,
definitely
certainly seemed to be the case.
I think, you know, it's the spearhead. Once that's gone, I think we'll see an absolute waterfall, you know, of change. I really do. Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much for today.
No, I
wonderful.
Really enjoyed it, and thank you everybody for partaking. It's just wonderful just to talk to you. Thank you.
We're going to do this again, aren't we? At a later stage, we'll be in touch about a date. So the next subject is actually tackling veganism and the pitfalls of that, or the positives and pitfalls. And some of the things you touched on earlier, which we didn't have a chance to go into. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening and being part of this. And again, thank you, Barbara. We all love you, and we really, I thank you from my heart, the fact that I'm able to share this work, and the fact that the college in Wales wouldn't exist without you. You know, if you hadn't have helped me during that time.
Oh, I'm so happy that you're there, and you know, and people are carrying on, because there's never been a bigger need than now, because so many people are becoming curious. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Lots of love.
Lots of love to everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you,
Love you all.
Barbara. Thank you. Thank you so
Barbara.
much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Can I
you.
just ask quickly, will we be able
Thank you,
to watch
everyone.
this back?
Yeah,
As a
it's
recording?
been recorded. It will be sent out. And yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you ever so much. Thank you, Barbara. I really
You're
appreciate
most
it.
welcome. Pleasure
Thank
to speak with
you.
you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.